All right, we're back. When I left you, we had knocked the studs out of the 67 hubs, and we're going to clean them up and de-rust them. As you can see, we've done that. They're pretty. I put the studs back in. I did drive the Mustang 2 races in the 67 hub. Fit perfectly. This allows us to use the Mustang 2 bearings and put them on Mustang 2 spindles, which is what we're planning to do in the future, of course. One of the problems that we had was we knew that our larger rotor, 14-inch rotor from a Mustang 2015 GT, we did get all the other parts for the Mustang GT. We got the calipers over here, the brake pads, the other disc, dust shields, bolts, most of what we need to put it together, but we'll still need to get a few more things. But the problem we found that we knew about was that this interior hole was much bigger than the hub. So we fixed that by taking a piece of pipe that was basically the same diameter of this hub, or this disc, cutting a small piece of it off and interfering fit or press fitting it down over the hub. Now we got this down. I had to get a special tool. Nobody makes a tool for something like that. So pretty simply, I just used a piece of pipe that would fit over the hub. I welded a shoulder in it all the way around. That allowed me to fit it right over the hub, capture that piece of pipe there, that spacer, and I just simply drove it down, pounding on it, of course, with the most handy garage tool in the place, a big hammer. All right, we did that so the hub wouldn't wobble around, right? That was the solution that we had thought of at the time. But like I said in the previous video, there's always something better. All right, that worked out really well. It does fit. It prevents the hub or the disc from moving on the hub. But if you notice, here, here, and here, these studs have shoulders on them that fit perfectly into the holes in the disc right here. Now that prevents the disc from wobbling or walking around. So truly, we didn't need the spacer. Didn't know that before I started this, so I hope somebody picks that up early on and doesn't go through all the trouble of doing that. Now why did those fit? Well, remember in the previous video, we had to cut the shoulders off of our studs in order to get the drum off of it. These are those studs that we cut the shoulders off of. Save these studs. The ones that have the teeth all the way up through, they do not interference fit in the disc. While they're good and they work, you got to have shoulder bolts to center the disc. There's 3 of them on this hub. There's 4 of them on this, 5, simply because that's what I had. Our next step is going to be to mount this assembly onto the car and then figure out how to put those on the car. Take the disc brake disc off the spindle. I've already removed my caliper off the brake setup, and now we'll take this off. Just wanted to go over this real quick so it's pretty easy. You can use a screwdriver under here and pry these dust caps off, or if they don't fit too tight, you can take your handy dandy channel locks and maybe wiggle the cap a little bit and get it off. It'll mark up your cap, so if you've got an exposed cap, don't use your channel locks on it, but otherwise works really well. This has got a long cotter pin on it, I see, but we'll get the cotter pin out of there. Pinch it down. Don't reuse cotter pins. Even if you get them out, even if they come out all pretty like this one, don't reuse them. I do tend to drop everything into my dust cap that comes off of here. It just makes it easier to find it all again in the end. This keeper out here, the cotter pin fits through these grooves. You just line it up so that it'll fit just perfectly. Keeps your nut in place. Everybody needs their nuts to be kept in place. But take a look at how this rolls on here. It rolls with very little friction, yet it doesn't wobble whatsoever. That's what we're looking for when we put this all back together. And we'll go over that in a later video, or maybe later in this one. We'll see. Anyway, these nuts shouldn't be on there very tight. There's no torque specs on it. We'll see that when we install it. It's got a little spacer piece here. It's got a notch in it. It fits right in the groove here on your spindle. Keeps it from spinning around. You don't want that spinning, just your bearing spinning. All right, that's all there is to it. You can see it came off. We have a bearing in the back. I'll spin it over here and show it to you here. We want to leave that one on in this case, but the bearing in the back's right in here. This is it right here. Hope you can see that. And this is your seal. Now if we were going to remove this, we could simply leave the nut on there, slide this part way out, and just give it a little thump, the bearing against the nut, and it'll pop this seal right out. But we want to leave it in there for this application. I'm going to use this in another vehicle, so we're just going to leave it there. Alright, this is our spindle. And we want to clean it off a little bit, make sure there's not any dirt, especially around the seal area. That's where it's going to have dirt, if there is any. The seal's keeping it from coming into the spindle at all. We've got some pretty nice grease on here, really. But we'll clean that all off because we want to make sure that the bearings, the spaces, the races, everything's good. And you can see this is practically brand new. There's no marking where the bearing sits here or the inner bearing sits on here. Our surface is good. The threads are great. We're ready to stick a new one on here. But what we're going to do in a short order is we're going to put the hub from the 67 Mustang front drums, which I put the bearings and races from a Mustang 2 in. Here's our Mustang 1967 hub. It had a drum on it, drum brakes on it. Actually, it was on this car when it had the stock Mustang suspension on it here. But right now, of course, we have a drop spindle for a Mustang 2 here, tubular control arms, coil spring in here, or coil over shocks here, great big sway bar, and this is to mount our brake caliper on, and we're going to probably modify this to fit a bigger caliper. We'll show you that later on in this video or the next video, depending on how far I get with it. All right, you can see there's no grease in this hub, so we want to make sure we grease the bearing races up really well. The bearings have grease on them anyway, but I like to make sure that we've got some grease in here. I also don't have the seal on it yet because I'm going to be playing with it. I'm going to be pulling it in and out a couple of times, and I don't want to mess up the seal, so no seal in it right now. But still, I'm going to be spinning it. I want to have some grease on my races. All right, we've greased them up pretty good. I'll get the bearings out of the bag. I like to pre-grease them. See, they're already greased. They're kept in a bag. They're clean. When I'm ready to use them, they're ready to go. So this is our inner. I simply drop it inside the hub there. It fits flat against the race. That's what we want to see. What we're going to see is actually how far this fits in and whether this edge hits against our spindle. It shouldn't, but you always check things before you do any assembly. All right, now let's put the inner or the outer bearing in. Just like before, it's already greased up. It just goes right on in. Should fit. There we go. Sits up nice. Then we go to that retaining ring I showed you before. It's got the groove in it. Should fit right in this groove. If you notice, this is actually a rounded edge on this and rather smooth, and this is a sharp edge on this. Really doesn't matter which way you put it on here. I kind of like to have the rounded edge against my bearing. Really doesn't matter. All right, we're going to run the castle nut down. Oh, this isn't a castle nut, excuse me, just regular nut. The retainer that fits on it kind of looks like a castle. All right, and all that I'm going to do is run this down finger tight, because this isn't a permanent installation yet. All right, now what I need to do is look in the back here and see what sort of gap I have back there. And we'll just scoot in here, take a look. I've got a full 1/4 inch gap between the back of my hub and my spindle, and it's in place, it's not wobbly, and it spins freely. So we could go ahead and put this all together, except as you notice we didn't have that rear seal in there. So it's not going together yet. We've got a lot of removal and replacement to do on this, and here's why. Remember that little disc that was on here before? Well, now it's getting a much bigger disc. This is from a 2015 Mustang. I was going to use a 2014, but I found 2015 a short while ago that was wrecked, and it needs. I took the brakes off of it, and these are huge. So these are what's going to be going on the car, provided I can make everything fit. Much larger than the original. So I'm going to run some nuts onto these. That'll hold this right here. Then I'm going to work on fitting the caliper on here. Okay, well, we got our big 14-inch rotor mounted here. We've got a few nuts holding it on. Our spacer, which kept it center. Now, that's compared to the 11.5 or 11-inch rotor right here, a much smaller rotor. And we're going to have to now put on a bigger caliper, because what this 11-inch was using is a very small single piston rotor, or a caliper. It works good, but not what I need for a car like this. It's way too big a motor, heavy car front end, heavy front end. So what we want to put on is a big old Ford caliper. Yeah, I know it was aluminum coated when you saw it last, or aluminum colored. I powder coated it in my oven. I have a small oven, small powder coating setup. Works really well. So how are we going to get that big one in place of the little one? Well, this is the bracket that the little one actually rides on, and it bolts up to the spindle in here. Now I could have just matched this one to my caliper. I would have had to shorten the arms drastically and drilled new holes, but I want to keep these with this caliper and the old spindle and the old rotor, and I can sell them as a kit later on if I want to. So how am I going to make this all work? Well, it was pretty difficult but pretty simple in process, but difficult to do just because I used tools in my garage. What I did was I built a new bracket. You can see this this hole here is this one here. These are the new mounting holes, but you can see that it looks very similar to the one that was in here. It's still a bit rough. I haven't done the finish work on it yet, but you got to make sure it all works and all fits and it's done right before you can powder coat it or make it look pretty. So it's just a piece of 1/2-inch steel. I marked out the holes, drilled them, got that one a little too close, so I've welded in a little bit. I'll go ahead and fill it in more and re-drill it before I'm done. Welded, cut out a piece of 1-inch stock, drilled, tapped it, cut a notch in the 1/2-inch steel plate to fit it in there, and then used a TIG welder to heat it up and get it down in there. This side looks really well. This side looks like a gorilla did it, but that's how I do my welding, guerrilla welding. So I'll mount it on there now, on the spindle. I'll put the brake on there and we'll take a look, see how that looks. All right, there's the big caliper on our 14-inch disc. So we have our large 4-piston caliper. It spins real good. There's just it's just touching a little bit, but you can see this rotor needs to be turned. It's got a little bit of rust spots on it. Now, what you got to do when you're putting this on is you got to be very careful to center your caliper. And what I mean by that is, let me move this around just a little bit. Is we're trying to center the caliper on the rotor. The rotor's in here, and this caliper needs to be centered this way. It needs to be directly centered on the rotor so that when you apply your brakes, they apply evenly. Also, you don't want to change it. You don't want it cocked one direction or the other. You want it perfectly straight. And this worked out really well. The spacer plate didn't need, or the mounting plate that I made didn't need a bunch of spacers to position this well. I just took about one washer to move it the way I wanted it to. The brake pads need to be as low or just a hair lower than the edge of your rotor. That way you know you got them deep enough. They can't go any lower than that, really. They'll rub on the inside of the caliper or on the bars here. But this is perfect. They're level with my rotor, which is just about where the factory sticks them. And the brake caliper is far enough down on this drum to allow my wheel to go over it without rubbing. So, that done, we're going to clean up the bracket we made. We're going to powder coat that, take these to a machine shop, have them turned. That's only one of the things I can't do here in my garage. Then I'm going to probably powder coat this inner portion, front and back, to prevent it from rusting. And we'll show you that when it's all done and get it mounted up on the car and show you the finished product. All right, here's the bolted on finished project. These are those 14-inch discs with the 4-piston calipers off a 2015 Mustang. One of the neat little tricks that also worked out well for me was that the dust shield from that 2015 Mustang is on here. It's difficult to see, I know, but it's right here. And I didn't think it was going to work, but if you take the left side one and put it on the right side, and the right side one and put it on the left side, it matches pretty close with a couple of holes already in your Mustang 2 spindle. So I simply drilled out those holes, trimmed out a small piece of metal that didn't fit, and it worked together. So now I've got the stop power to stop my go power. And it's all on. See if I can get back here far enough to get it. That 1967 Mustang. So I hope you got some ideas from what I did there. I certainly found some easier ways to do things while we were doing it. But don't be afraid to stick those big discs and better brakes underneath your early model Mustang. Catch everybody later. Wanted to give you a quick shot of the brakes with the wheel on it as well. That's an 18-inch wheel with the 14-inch discs and the 4-piston forward calipers. This is how it looked when it was done. It's great shape, lots of clearance. Looks a whole lot better than the 11-inch disc that was under it. Thanks for watching, guys.